Hi friends. The whole range of mankind's history has been a weapons contest of endurance adjustments against maladies which appear to be out to totally annihilate us, both as individual living beings and as an aggregate animal varieties. Each opportunity we think of another strategy to battle different transferable illnesses, the pathogens dependable change and transform, turning out to be better adjusted to our weapons against them. Such is the method for the entirety of life. Theorists are even now drawing comparisons to this dynamic to describe crime, wherein criminals adopt new methods of law-breaking, only to again be outdone by advances in law enforcement. Life is continually endeavoring to exceed and conquer itself. Considering this, there have been some truly severe infections which have undermined whole civic establishments on numerous events. The expression plague is utilized commonly here to mean any kind of pathogen which crushed an enormous segment of a human populace. However, a considerable lot of the accompanying sections, truth be told, include the plague you're considering. Here are 10 of the most atrocious plagues in human history, what they were, and what happened. Very late investigations of mass grave locales in collapses Sweden have revealed numerous bodies, however have additionally uncovered something very unnerving, the most seasoned known strain of the plague as in the genuine Black Plague, Yersinia pestis, the bacteria which wiped out much of medieval Europe in several waves. It is thought to have struck well before the verifiable diseases we are aware of, and discovering it on 5,000-year-old bodies in Sweden gives that thought some genuine credibility. While the primary known enormous Yersinia pestis episode was the Justinian plague, which pushed the Byzantine Empire to the edge of total collapse in AD 541 and kept on striking constantly for 200 additional years, executing more than 25 million individuals, we realize it was around. Very late investigations of mass grave locales in collapses Sweden have revealed numerous bodies, however have additionally uncovered something very unnerving, the most seasoned known strain of the plague as in the genuine Black Plague, Yersinia pestis, the bacteria which wiped out much of medieval Europe in several waves. It is thought to have struck well before the verifiable diseases we are aware of, and discovering it on 5,000-year-old bodies in Sweden gives that thought some genuine credibility. While the primary known enormous Yersinia pestis episode was the Justinian plague, which pushed the Byzantine Empire to the edge of total collapse in AD 541 and kept on striking constantly for 200 additional years, executing more than 25 million individuals, we realize it was around disturbing human social orders long. Sometime before that, around 5,000 to 6,000 years back, we realize that human populaces took a sharp decrease for some reason. Researchers are presently starting to think they have the guilty party, the absolute first Black Plague. The microscopic organisms is still around today, so for what reason isn't it any place close as fatal as the one that for all intents and purposes cleared out the rest of the Roman Empire, or the 14th century plague that killed as much as 60% of the number of inhabitants in Europe? Adaptation. People have adjusted approaches to ward it off since. At this moment, the disclosure in Sweden is the most established strain of Yersinia pestis we've found. There might be more out there, resting in the earth. Athens was struck hard by a baffling pathogen between the long stretches of 430 and 427 BC. Known as the Plague of Athens, the pandemic incredibly upset their endeavors in the Peloponnesian War. This plague is nitty-gritty in the celebrated work, The History of the Peloponnesian War, which tells of the disease wiping out more than one-third of the Athenian population at the time. Thucydides, the creator, depicted the manifestations of this severe plague in incredible detail, with violent coughing, retching, and convulsions being some of the items on the list. Researchers, despite everything, aren't actually certain what the plague of Athens was, yet researchers in the different sciences have guessed it was potentially measles, smallpox, or a couple of different ailments. While we may not know the specific strain of pathogen that struck, we certainly realize it did an extensive, sickening measure of harm to the Athenian populace. In spite of the fact that it's encircled in equivocalness, whatever this mean bug was is thought to have contributed enormously to the defeat of traditional Greece. Beginning in AD 165, the Roman Empire was shaken by a violently fierce plague that was a dim, unfavorable cloud, portending what might be on the horizon. Numerous researchers accept this episode to have been an instance of smallpox. Whatever it was, it definitely rocked the sturdy empire at its foundations and ultimately altered the course of history. The Antonine Plague was so bad that at its height, it was killing up to 2,000 people per day in the ancient empire, and anywhere from 7 to 10% of the Roman population did not survive. The outstretched Roman army, who lived around other people as they walked across Europe, was hit especially hard, influencing Rome's military may and at last adding to a later downsizing of the realm. This likewise changed the snugness of the individuals, as they developed removed and separated, much like later torment would likewise cause in different social orders, particularly medieval Europe. This plague prepared for the Germanic societies to take a solid footing and eventually would prompt the unavoidable decay of the Roman Empire. In bombing physical and monetary well-being, Rome was in a tough situation, all gratitude to a plague that assaulted its populace. Recollect that first surfacing of the bubonic plague we mentioned earlier that brought the Byzantine Empire to its knees? It was fierce. It was extremely severe. The Byzantine Empire is in reality just actually another name for the Eastern Roman Empire at the time span, and the Byzantines, while they communicated in Greek and were based out of Constantinople, were still very much the Roman Empire and referred to themselves as such. Frequently alluded to as the Plague of Justinian I, this plague hit Constantinople, the heart of the empire, in 541 and then spread outward over the course of the next year to reach the full outskirts of the Roman Empire. At this time, Justinian was really starting to rebuild the Roman Empire and was making headway in military campaigns in the West in attempts to reclaim the glory of Rome. This plague brought those endeavors to an abrupt halt. In a dismal foretelling of what was to hit Europe centuries later, this plague, too, was brought through trade, mainly being carried and transmitted by fleas insects on rodents. In any case, it didn't stop there and wasn't restricted to just the Eastern Roman Empire. The plague before long spread further to the different medieval states which had taken a toehold in Europe after the breakdown of the western portion of the Roman Empire. This plague desolated Europe totally and murdered at any rate 25 million individuals. That is an incredible pathogen. One thing was for sure now of mankind's history, expanding trade routes and greater transportation technologies had their downfalls and brought with them millions of deaths. They would bring many more. Then came the Black Death, the Great Plague. This plague started in China in 1334, and like the plague of Justinian, it spread to Europe through trade routes. This plague was out for death, and nobody could stop it. The ravaging bubonic death toll would reach peak heights in 1348 in Europe, Subsequent to having voyaged once more through the Byzantine Empire, up the trade routes, and into the bloodstreams of Europe. This plague was so ruthless and tenacious that it would go on to wipe out up to 60% of all of Europe at the time. This changed the European standpoint extraordinarily. Fewer and fewer people relied on prayer and began opening their minds to other things. The way of life significantly adapted, and quite a bit of our extraordinary craftsmanship originated from the period which followed. At that point came the infection scourges of the Americas. Smallpox initially showed up in the states of Florida, Carolina, and Virginia in 1519 and crushed the local populace subsequent to being brought by the colonizing Europeans. It reached Massachusetts in 1633. Due to the fact that the so-called New and Old Worlds were so far removed, the Native Americans had little, if any, immune resistance to the viruses of Europe, like measles, plague, and particularly smallpox. Smallpox was especially merciless and spread to Central and South America too, greatly infecting the Aztec Empire. In only 100 years, a fraction of the hour of the plague of Justinian, it cleared out 90% of the Aztec populace, a drop from 17 million individuals to just 1.3 million. These illnesses murdered such a significant number of that lone and expected 530,000 Native Americans were left alive by 1900. This makes the American torment a portion of the most exceedingly awful of recorded mankind's history. The supposed modern plague happened in China, starting in or around 1860, and was once more another fierce pestilence that you don't find out about much in history books. It hit Hong Kong in 1894. This plague would strike for still another 20 years, killing around 10 million people. This brutal outbreak would spread to India as well. During this most recent plague, nonetheless, science isolated the reason, namely the fleas that traveled on rodents. Usually from ships or trade, which would bite and transfer the bacteria. It got conceivable to treat the infection and even forestall future episodes. Polio hit, and polio hit hard, and there are still individuals alive today who recall the scourge. Poliomyelitis is brought about by the polio virus, which aggressively attacks the human nervous system, causing all sorts of horrifying results, and has slaughtered many individuals, especially striking children under the age of 5 years old. The epidemic hit its worst in the United States in 1952, as doctors sought every and any method to treat and cure the disease. In 1933, there were 5,000 known instances of crippled polio in the United States, and by 1952, that number had hopped to 59,000, well over 10 times. Polio was finally stopped by the development of 2 vaccines against it. HIV is apparently the last huge pandemic to strike planet Earth, or it is for the present, in any case. It hit hard and got across the board by the mid-1980s. As right on time as 1981, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, in the United States started distributing pieces and watching out for a spreading infection that was taking lives. This infection was opportunistic and struck the gay community particularly hard. By June 16, 1981, the stage was set as the first man with AIDS, a 35-year-old gay Caucasian, ventured into a specialist's office for help and wound up being admitted to the clinical center at the National Institute of Health. This 35-year-old man would be dead by October 28. From here, the ailment would spread, and by 1986, the CDC would announce that more individuals in 1985 were determined to have AIDS than every single earlier year joined. This was a quickly spreading pandemic, in a computerized age with radio and television as well as computers. The infection kept on desolating the world through the 1990s and 2000s. In any case, humankind retaliated against this overall bane and created antiretroviral drugs and different medications which in any event figured out how to some degree contain the infection, at first. Presently, we have drugs that can do extraordinary things. 2 HIV-positive people can have an HIV-negative baby, and a positive partner can sleep with a negative partner and, through the assistance of medications, not give the infection to the negative partner. Cures and vaccines are in the works, with diligent people working hard and creating medicine to combat this global epidemic on a daily basis. Billions of dollars have been donated to the cause. This gives us trust in our cutting-edge medication, our capacity to react to a scourge of this size, spreading at this mind-boggling rate, so consistently and rapidly, as we gradually walk down the way to triumph. It shows guarantee for the eventual fate of battling pathogens which try to take us out. Be that as it may, there will consistently be another coming.